Hey guys, I'm Angela and welcome back to Hobby Night. Today I'm going to be painting some Starblood Stalkers. Now, before we begin, I wanted to go ahead and say hello and welcome to all of the new subscribers that have joined us since I painted the Leman Russ. You guys seem to really enjoy me painting that tank. I will certainly be keeping that in mind. Maybe there'll be more tanks down the line. But for today, because I wanted to move away from something that was metal and inorganic and huge like the tank was, I thought, why not go small, like really small, and go with a tiny little chameleon. I believe his name is Otapatl, but I'm gonna call him Ota. And we're gonna paint Ota the chameleon, and I'm very excited for it. So let's go ahead and get right into it. I knew that I was going to go into this project wanting a really warm color palette to go with a lot of bright greens and yellows and everything. So to complement that, I'm going to start with a spray primer of Wraithbone Spray Prime, just because this has a little bit of a warm undercoat and it will give me that warmth that I'm looking for as I go through my project. Now that he's spray primed in Wraithbone, I'm actually going to do something that I don't normally do, and that's start with my lightest color tone, and that's going to be Plaguebearer Flesh. I'm going to be putting this on the entire chameleon as well as the fern that's on his base. Now, why I am doing this is because I'm going to be taking him off and on the base a little bit, and I know that I'm going to be painting the Wildwood color onto the Stump later on, which is a really dark color tone, and I'm wanting to avoid taking too much paint off with my hands from the oils on them as I'm handling it. So I'm going to start with the chameleon, get him done entirely first, and then wrap up with the Wildwood on the Stump. So let's go ahead and get that color down and move on. Let's start adding some depth and some deeper, richer green color tones now to my chameleon. And for that, I'm going to be using a wash of Beil-tan shade. I'm going to be applying this primarily at the top of the model first and working my way down towards the limbs into basically its extremities, because I want to gradually blend this color out. I want to basically emphasize this darker color tone up top and have it fade to the bottom. This will give me a cool organic transition, and I feel like chameleons and lizards often have like this sort of uneven patterning in their scales and everything, and this will allow me to accomplish that without having to do any wet blending specifically, which can be a little finicky sometimes, and still get some really nice rich colors without losing that really nice Plaguebearer's Flesh color tone that I've put down already. As an add-on, because I can't believe I almost forgot this, I also used the Beil-tan shade to do a cool freehand effect on the chameleon's tail. I saw this on some of the photos that I saw of the miniature when it was first coming out, and I thought it was a really cool idea. So I'm going to use the Beil-tan shade and basically make these little rings around the tail to basically give it a little bit of a pattern. I really like this effect. It goes really well. I think in the future I might try to plan them out a little bit better, because on one side they don't quite, actually they line up a little too much and they tangent with each other. So that's something I'll need to fix later, or like think about in the future when I'm doing this again. But overall, I'm really happy with how this freehand turned out. Now, I really like where I've gotten my Beil-tan shade and where he's looking now, but I want to push that green a bit more. You see how there's some raised scales on his backside? Well, I'm going to take some Warp Lightning and apply that directly onto those scales, but only those scales, so that I get this really nice, very bold and vivid pop of green that I really just, it just works really well. I love that complement of the yellow-green beneath with these like more true greens on top. He just looks so cool already, and I'm absolutely digging it. Oh, hey, didn't see you guys there. Well, while you're here, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video. My little chameleon has this tiny, tiny little frog pouch on his, like, strapped to his belt, where he keeps all of his, I assume, poison darts or whatever he's using out of that blowpipe. And I thought that painting him up would be fun to do in a little bit of a blue tone, because jungle frogs often have like sometimes like really bright, bold colors to indicate poison or like danger. And so to complement my green hues, I went with a blue instead of doing something like red and contrasting, because I don't want the frog to stand like boldly out against him, but I do want him to still have that jungle vibe. So the Aethermatic blue works perfectly for this. I think it's time now to work on his weapons and some of his accessories. So for that, I'm going to be using Darkoath Flesh. Now I chose this color because one, I wanted a slightly different but still mid-tone brown color for the wood on the pipe specifically and on his darts and everything, but also for that cord that's on his that's actually holding the frog there. And we're gonna just put this paint directly over top. We're not gonna worry about any cleanup or anything here because this color's dark enough, it should just cover it and it'll add a little bit of variety and hue difference, which I actually kind of like. But the other reason I went with this color is because it reminds me of teak. I really wanted to keep with that jungle theme, and we're gonna apply this actually to everything on these portions because I'm gonna use this color as my undercoat from the metallic, which I'll be using next. And that metallic is going to be Screaming Belle, which is a color I've never used before, but I'm really excited to because I've been really on this kick of like soft, sort of light-toned metallics. Screaming Belle is the complete opposite of this. It's bold, it's bright, it's almost like orange, which I really, really like, and I think it complements my greens really well, which is the main reason I chose it. Also, I always like, for jungles, I either go like really deep, deep gold or very, very copper, and so I decided to go with the copper route for this one. The chameleon is feeling pretty finished, so I'm comfortable now moving on to the actual stump that he's standing on, and for that, like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be using some wild wood. This is the thing that I wanted to be the darkest on my figure because I wanted to just keep everything very bright, very organic, very green and everything and light, except for this piece of wood. I wanted to keep this as dark as possible, and wild wood just works perfectly for this. Now, I am going to be a little bit careful while applying this paint to this portion of the miniature, despite the fact that it has actually a relatively large surface area, and so I could just be kind of slapping paint down. But I don't want to be doing that because I've already painted the chameleon and he connects to this piece, so I want to make sure I'm clean as possible when I'm especially around his like feet and near his tail. Now, if I do get any brown paint onto, say, his claws or anything, I'll just take a little bit of Wraithbone, go back over them, and retouch them up with some Plaguebearer flesh, which is partially why I didn't want to bring my shade too heavily down onto the limbs. I knew there would be a chance I'd have some spillover, I might need to do some cleanup, and this allows me to do so without actually messing up any of the previous blending that I've done. I'm ready to move on to his base, and I have been doing a lot of basing recently that's either been like mud, swamp, or asphalt. And I want to move away from that. I want to go really light and kind of almost give him a beach theme. So for that, I'm going to first lay down a base coat of Tallarn sand. This will give me a nice warm undercoat that will shine through but won't be too dark. I'm going to go ahead and finish up that tiny little fern that's on his base there. And for that, because I used the exact same color tone on it that I did the chameleon, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different to help basically differentiate that shade and everything. And for that, we're going to be going back to Camoshade. This gives me a really nice sort of muted green tone that I think really works well with a jungle theming. Like I often see a lot of like really warm yellow greens happening in a lot of like jungle vegetation when you buy like tufts and stuff. So I think this will complement it well and really just add that depth in there. Next up, we're going to add some Agrath Earthshade to our base, putting that all over the sand and basically making sure to just layer this really nicely. This will add some shadows to our sand, give us some depth into some of those like recessed areas that they have on the sculpted base, and it looks pretty darn good. While my base is drying, we're going to temporarily come back to my chameleon because there's one thing that I have not done on him, and that is apply some Cryptek Armorshade to all that Screaming Belle color tone that I put down already. I want to do this just because, one, I want the coppery color to look like it's been worn and aged, like he's been actually using that tool to, you know, poison people. And also just because I don't like the look of just a metallic straight out of the pot. It's really, really shiny, and this helps knock back some of that shine, and it just looks so good. Cryptek works on basically almost all the colors of metallics that I've seen so far. It's really, really versatile. I was looking at my miniature, and I was looking at the frog specifically. He wasn't popping enough for me. I really liked the blue tone, that was working. I liked the brown that was around him, but his eyes were just like dull looking. So I pulled out some Yriel yellow, hope I pronounced that correctly, I'm not actually sure, and just gently like dab this onto his eyes to get a little bit of a dot there, and it just works so well. It adds a little bit of a bright pop in there. It absolutely does not detract from anything, and I love my little frog now. We're going back to the beach, and we're going to actually now make it feel a little bit more like a white sand beach with a bit of Tyrant Skull. I'm going to do this with a relatively heavy dry brush that I'm going to layer kind of over time. So I still want to make sure that I'm getting plenty of paint off of my brush before I apply this paint to it, but I do want to make sure that I do apply this pretty liberally. So we're just going to keep going over it until I basically get to the point where I'm happy with the level of white to dark recessed areas from my shade. That balance looks good, and I really am happy with how this base is turning out. Now, you might notice while I'm doing this, there's a random plant there. Don't worry, we're going to take care of that too. And to take care of that plant, I'm going to pull back out Warp Lightning. Now, I did this because I wanted to tie that sort of rich jungle green color that I'd put onto my chameleon back into my base, and I felt this was going to be a great way to do it. Now, I went ahead and dry brushed over top of this plant life, which means that with a very light tone actually, so my contrast paint goes directly over top of it fine, and I really like this. It's actually one of the things why I didn't bother going and touching it back up, because I figured it's pale enough, the green is going to shine through totally fine. There's one final thing to do before I reattach my chameleon to his base, and that is to go ahead and rim the base using some black carbon paint. Now, sorry, it's called black carbon. I said that sort of reversed. This is not a Citadel color or anything. It is by a company called Golden, which just makes your sort of traditional art paints that you can find at like a Michael's and that kind of thing. It's just a really deep black that I like to use, and I happen to have it, and it's just what I tend to go for my basing for when I'm rimming. Now, the main reason I'm doing this before I've attached him is because his base actually has this little section that you've probably noticed it that sort of sits off. The log actually hangs off the edge of the base. I like that little touch. It's really cool. That's really great that they've done that. But I wanted to make sure that underneath that was solidly black, and I wasn't going to accidentally get black paint on my now brown piece of wood. So hence why we're painting the rim first. And here he is, my tiny little chameleon, Oda. I'm really pleased with how he came out, and I'm also very glad that painting lizards was as fun as I was expecting it to be. I have been wanting to paint Lizardmen for a long time, actually, because I knew that contrast paint specifically was just going to be a lot of fun to use on him, and it was. I look forward to painting the entire rest of this set. Hopefully I'll actually get around to that sooner rather than later, because genuinely, like, I have no interest at all in playing them as like a faction specifically, but holy cow, do I want to paint a bunch more lizards. Like, I'm actually really tempted to get one of the big lizard models and just go to town on some of those scales. Maybe, ooh, I actually did pick up the, I finally got around to picking up those spells from the, for the Dark Elves, and that has that big old snake in it. Maybe I'll finally get around to painting that, because now that I've done this guy, I'm like, oh, I totally get that appeal. I want to use these colors more. And the other nice thing about this was, for me, I have been using a lot of reds, muted greens, like more olive greens, and like darker color tones, like a lot of blacks, grays, metallics and everything recently, or just like these darker color tones. So doing something a lot brighter and bolder was just awesome for me to just be able to get around to painting, because sometimes it's nice to step away from doing those super grim dark or the really dark color tones and do something bright, fun, and colorful. And especially now that spring is finally here and everything, I'm just hyped for it. I'm hyped for this lizard. Let me know what you guys think about this guy in the comments below. How would you have done it differently? What colors would you have used? And let me know what you might just like to see me paint from Underworlds next, because I know there's a couple more kits coming, and I'm very excited for those as well. But I have been Angela. You've been watching Hobby Night. Thank you guys so much for watching, in fact, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!